Is it one step forward, two steps back for Britain's Prime Minister on Brexit? Theresa May postpones the parliamentary vote on her deal with the EU and meets European leaders for more talks, while the EU Commission says there's no room for renegotiation. So, what now? This is Inside Story. Hello, I'm Imran Khan and welcome to Inside Story. Deal or no deal? That's the question dividing Britons as Prime Minister Theresa May fights it out, both in Parliament, in London and with the European Union in Brussels. Monday's planned vote by British MPs to say yes or no to the Brexit deal was postponed by Theresa May. Instead, she flew to the Netherlands and Germany, hoping to win last-minute concessions. But the door was quickly slammed shut. There's absolutely no room for renegotiation, is the message from the European Commission.
The deal we have achieved is the best deal possible. It's the only deal possible. And so we cannot. There is no room whatsoever for renegotiation. But, of course, there is room, if used intelligently, is room enough to give further clarifications and further interpretations without opening the withdrawal agreement. This will not happen. Everyone has to know that the withdrawal agreement will not be reopened.
Jonah Hull's outside Westminster in London with this update.
Well, the repercussions of Monday's decision by the government to pull the so-called meaningful vote into Theresa May's Brexit deal continue here. Westminster awash with speculation over quite what it was she hoped to achieve by doing it and what her chances of success may be, apparently in seeking reassurances from the European Union over the dreaded backstop. Well, not helped by Claude, the European Commission President, who said earlier that no renegotiation of the deal was possible. Well, meanwhile, in Parliament, an emergency debate is taking place. The opposition Labour Party complaining that the government circumvented procedure, disrespecting Parliament in pulling that vote without consulting Parliament itself. Well, Theresa May, of course, not here to see or hear that debate. She's off on her mini tour of Europe, looking for support among erstwhile allies like the Dutch, like the Germans, hoping they will come to her aid and help give her a form of words that will win over doubting MPs when she brings the deal back for a vote, we're now told, by January the 21st. Well, that support, if it's to be found in the EU, is sorely lacking here in Britain. Many people in wider and wider circles say she's a Prime Minister who has lost all credibility and all authority. And while she's away, expect backroom, behind-the-scenes dealings to go on, possibly a leadership challenge launched within her own party, letters said to be going in as we speak, possibly as well a vote of confidence launched by the opposition Labour Party in Parliament, with other opposition parties lining up to support it. The confusion, the uncertainty, some say the chaos of Brexit, still very much ongoing. Jonah Hull, Al Jazeera for Inside Story in Westminster.
Theresa May blames the vote delay on the Brexit backstop. But what is it and why is it such a sticking point? It's a safety net or insurance policy that aims to avoid a hard border and the rebuilding of checkpoints on the border between Northern Ireland, which is part of the United Kingdom, and the Republic of Ireland, which is an EU member. The backstop's been agreed to allow free trade and no customs checks on exports. But many British members of Parliament who want to leave the EU fear the backstop will mean the whole of the UK will remain tied to the EU rules indefinitely. Britain's Prime Minister wants a time limit on the backstop and any deal with the EU to apply to the whole of the UK. But the EU wants the backstop in place for as long as it takes and for it to only apply to Northern Ireland. Let's bring in our panellists. In London, we're joined by Jonathan Liss, Deputy Director of the British Influence. In Strasbourg, Claude Moraes, a Labour member of the European Parliament for London and Chair of the European Parliament's Civil Liberties, Justice and Home Affairs Committee. And again, in Westminster, Catherine McBride, Senior Economist, International Trade and Competition Unit at the Institute of Economic Affairs. Welcome you all to the programme. I'd like to begin with you, Catherine, in London. Has Britain made the wrong decision?
No, I don't think you can ever say that. This is a democracy. They went to the vote. They had a very extensive period before the referendum, and the people voted to leave. And I think that it was, and the government had an obligation to enact that referendum decision, which both the Conservative Party and the Labour Party put on their manifesto in a recent 2017 election pledge. And before the referendum, the government also said that whatever the people decided would be enacted. So you might not like the decision, but it was the decision, and that's how democracy works.
Let me bring in Jonathan Liss here in London. The people voted, the decision has been made, but yet here we are with seemingly utter confusion in Westminster, people not really understanding what they seem to be voted for, whether it was a hard Brexit, a soft Brexit, a in-between Brexit. It seems to be a very confusing situation, even for experts. People say that they voted, the people voted, but what did they vote for? Did they know they were voting for where we are today?
Well, that's exactly the question. They were voting for Brexit, but even leading Brexiteers say that it wasn't this deal. And they say that they would rather remain than have this deal. So if they are not happy, how can we know that the voters were happy as well? And that's why there's a gathering momentum to check the people's will, if you like, the people's consent in a so-called people's vote or second referendum, which would ask people, is this the Brexit you wanted? And is this the Brexit you want to have implemented? So it's kind of like a checking procedure, because people say that voters knew what they were voting for, but 2 years later, MPs can't decide. No one seems to know what it was.
Let's bring in Claude Moraes here in Strasbourg. You're at the European Union Parliament at the moment. How is Britain being seen by the European Union? Everything that's going on, what are you hearing? How is Britain being seen?
Well, first of all, it's not the number one priority. There are many other priorities now in the European Union, but it is featuring yet again on the Council agenda, on the agenda of the Member States on Thursday, mainly because we as a nation can't make up our minds as to how we're going to leave. The European Union, as far as it can see, has closed the chapter. It's offered a deal. Today, I was there when President Juncker, and you made a clip of this, said very clearly the deal isn't going to be reopened. I think there was some implication that there might be some tweaking of the political declaration, but the deal itself legally is not going to be opened, this backstop and so on. So for that reason, the European Union has closed the chapter, but we as a country, the United Kingdom, in enacting the will of the people in the referendum, clearly have not closed the chapter. So how the EU perceives it is very clear, but it's not clear from the United Kingdom side. And the reason for that, as the previous guest rightly said, is about perceptions of how people voted, the information that they used to vote on, and what their expectations were. And I think Brexiteers, as well as people who wanted to remain, should readily admit, in all honesty, that referendum was not a referendum that really had all the real objective information that we needed to make that decision. We made it, but of course we're now seeing the consequences of a very bad negotiation and a bad prospectus.
Catherine McBride in London, should there be a second referendum on this issue?
Not until they've implemented the first referendum. And I think if you talk to a lot of the Brexiteers, they will clearly say that they didn't vote for a deal, they voted to leave. And that was what was written on the voting paper. Do you want to leave the European Union? And that's what they did. They voted to leave. And that really means they should leave on WTO terms. And the government had 2 years under the Article 50 arrangement to do this, to organise to leave on WTO terms. And for some reason, Theresa May has refused to try and do that. Philip Hammond has been equally difficult. He's had money in the budget to organise the WTO movement, and he's done nothing towards it, or very little towards it. And that has been a complete failure of our government. The people want to leave the EU. If you want to have a second referendum, then organise it for 5 years' time or 40 years' time, like the last one, when people have been able to see whether they were better off in or out of the EU. But to have another referendum when you haven't actually implemented the first referendum and you've offered the people a quite unsatisfactory withdrawal agreement, which is entirely in favour of the EU, and everyone, Brexiteers and Remainers, can see that this is not a good deal, would be ludicrous. We have to enact the proper referendum, which is to leave. And I do believe we can leave on WTO terms. I also believe that the EU offered the UK a free trade agreement in March, which for some reason the government refused to accept.
Let's bring in London here and Jonathan Liss. Jonathan, I see you shaking your head there. Do you believe there should be a second referendum?
I do, and Catherine has just illustrated some of the reasons. In fact, she says that the first referendum. She said the first referendum, the result needs to be implemented, but no one can agree on how that should be done. The government has proposed withdrawal agreement, which she rightly says has been rejected by Remainers and Leavers, but nobody was voting, very, very few people voting to leave on the so-called WTO terms or no deal. Neither the Remain campaign nor the Leave campaign ever discussed a no-deal Brexit. It was always assumed that we would have a deal, and in fact, Vote Leave put on its literature that we could be part of a free trade zone stretching from Iceland, which is in the single market, to Turkey, which is in the customs union. So the idea that people are voting simply to leave on WTO terms is in fact a nonsense. And so really we have to settle this before we leave rather than after it.
Claude, let me bring you in here from Strasbourg. You've heard both sides of the argument there for a second referendum. However, where is the Labour Party in all of this? Why isn't the Labour Party stepped up and offered an alternative?
We haven't heard... I'm sorry, we haven't heard both sides. What you've heard yet again on mainstream media is somebody talking about WTO rules. And this is a real problem in the British referendum debate. Nobody's explaining to people what that means. That means a no-deal scenario. And that has not been explained to people. The previous guest was correct that a number of scenarios were described to the British public when we were going to leave. And many Brexiteers talked about a Norway option, talked about free trade deals. But, you know, if anyone is saying that the British people understood what it means to go out on no deal, then they're wrong, because no deal is a very serious situation. And these free traders, the Institute of Economic Affairs, talking about WTO rules so glibly, I mean, that is an economic disaster for the UK. And nobody is explaining that in detail to people on the ground in the UK. So I think this needs to be properly explained to people.
Could you
if
just
there was a
explain
second
that
referendum,
in detail?
that would be explained. It wasn't explained. Well, it's up to the IEA, who are talking glibly about
I find
WTO
that this
rules
happens a
and
lot,
not telling
though.
people what that would mean.
Well,
Mrs. May talked about how our poorest regions would be damaged. The Prime Minister of Britain was talking about that yesterday. Why do you think she was saying that? And why do you think everyone more or less agrees on that when the IEA thinks that this is such a clean
Mrs.
break
May
and everyone thinks it's a great idea? And this is one of the problems. This is one of the problems. This is one of the problems with the extreme fringes that came into the referendum debate. Instead of having a balanced debate showing all the different options of leaving and how difficult it would be to leave the European Union, instead we got this, it's going to be easy, we'll have a free trade deal very easily. And by the way, we're going into a blind Brexit. All the other issues other than trade, security, aviation, all of these things have not been decided.
Catherine, we'll come to you in just a second in London, but I would like to press Claude.
Because,
go ahead, please.
Can I say something? Can I say that, first of all, a lot of people like to say that a WTO deal would be a disaster without actually spelling out why they think that. I'd like to remind you that our biggest trading partner, the United States, actually trades on WTO terms with us.
Oh, this
so
is such
I don't know
rubbish,
why everyone
honestly.
thinks it would be such a disaster.
No country.
Also, Mrs. May did say in her Lancaster House speech, she said no deal would be better than a bad deal, and yet no deal is basically WTO
doesn't say that now.
terms. So you cannot have that as your fallback option and not prepare for it.
She doesn't say that now.
So while a free trade agreement would be preferable, she didn't prepare for the no-deal option, which she must have done, she should have done, because that was what we would have
Catherine,
got to.
she doesn't say that now, does she?
You know, people say it'll be a disaster.
These are the kinds of...
Well, now she's offered us a bad deal, saying this is the only deal.
Okay, there's a bad deal. We're talking a lot about Theresa May. We're talking a lot about Theresa May here. Claude, I just want to ask you the question that I asked you earlier again. Where is Jeremy Corbyn, the leader of the Labour Party? Where is the Labour Party in all of this? It seems to be very quiet.
Yeah. Mrs May doesn't say that now. She says a deal is better than no deal, and she is very afraid of no deal. So let's just be up to date, Catherine. Secondly, on the Labour Party, yes, we have an issue here because at the moment, the Labour Party is not clear where it's going. It wants a general election. A general election is very hard to get. And would a general election result in a negotiated situation at this late stage under the timetable we have? Very unlikely. So, of course, we have a number of options which are very difficult to define. And that leads us very often, I think, to thinking about a referendum situation when many people didn't want to see a second referendum, but it may inevitably lead to that. So yes, a motion of no confidence, asking for a general election under our fixed term General Elections Act, which is Labour Party policy, is a very difficult prospectus to deal with. Nobody's arguing that it's going to be easy. But we are now in this dog's breakfast, or dog's Brexit, as somebody called it, because it was so badly negotiated from the start. But we were never going to get the same deal as being in the EU with all of those benefits. So yes, we are now in the situation with the Prime Minister's deal, which is bad, no deal, which is disastrous, or we have these options of a general election or a referendum. And they are all difficult options, but you can see where a referendum lies in all of this.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about what happens next. Let's bring in Jonathan Liss in London here. We'll come to you, Catherine, very shortly. Jonathan, what does, in your opinion, happen next? Is there a need for a radical rethinking of the whole Brexit policy?
Well, in terms of Theresa May, she is going to ask her EU partners to renegotiate the backstop, which is the most contentious part of the withdrawal agreement. They are going to say no, and so she is going to have to come back to Parliament empty-handed. So when she delayed the vote, what she was really just doing was deferring her political defenestration. She wasn't sort of ending the possibility of it. So she is, politically, it seems that she is finished. So
Catherine,
really, as Claude was saying...
Catherine, is Theresa May finished?
Yeah, I think on that, all of your panellists and most of the people in Parliament will be agreeing. I don't think you'll get any controversy there, including all the people shouting behind me. I'm sure that they think she's finished as well. But I would take issue with why no deal would be such a disaster. I think that there are things we have to do to mitigate it. We have to sign, well, they have, in fact, about 75% of the things that they need to do, they've done. They have organised driver's licences, holiday visas, things like that have been done. The planes will fly, etc. And so far, we had a big drop in the pound after the referendum, and that's just meant that our exports are up, our foreign direct investment is up, and the FTSE is up. So in fact, it hasn't been the disaster, and our employment is up. So when people say leaving without a deal will be a disaster, they're never able to tell me exactly why that will be a disaster and who that will be a disaster for.
Claude, everything sounds wonderful. Catherine is saying everything's okay.
Stories. You listen, if Catherine could let me get a word in, the pound hitting a new 2-year low. You know, I mean, Catherine, do you watch Bloomberg or CNBC? Just have a look. I mean, do they honestly tell you that this is a good thing? It's a good thing that we've hit a 2-year low with the pound. This is an indication of what will happen when we actually leave.
Unfortunately for you, I specialise in financial services.
Can I finish? I mean, Yeah. Can I finish my point? This is an indicator of what is happening to our economy. You talk about foreign direct investment. Of course, there are some immediate benefits of a lower pound. I think we all know that. We're not completely dim. We understand. But you must understand, if the pound is collapsing in front of our eyes for this long, it is an indication of what the markets think of what is happening with Brexit. And honestly, if you think British business is going to welcome Brexit in itself, welcome this deal in itself, give us a break. Come on. Wake up and smell the coffee. This is a real problem, and the options we have are imperfect. Just to answer your previous question about Mrs. May, just to answer your previous question about Mrs. May, if you would let me finish. Mrs. May, unfortunately, is going to be in, and she's counting down the clock. And this is the worry for a big economy like Britain. If she's counting down the clock to get a result which is not a strategic result, which may be her deal versus no deal, which is a disaster that Catherine's talking about, so glibly. The problem, I think, then, for a big economy like Britain, and no big economy trades, completely on WTO rules without deals, as Catherine fully knows, then we will be in a real problem. And that's the problem with Mrs. May, that she's hanging around too long.
The United States trades with us on WTO rules. So, look, please don't make things up. And it's well known that Germany's currency,
wait a minute, Catherine,
using the euro, is about 20% lower than where it would be.
With other...
Oh, look.
Let's bring in Jonathan. Jonathan's been very patient listening to you both.
It trades with Europe on WTO trade. Okay.
Very quickly, Jonathan, I want to ask you, what does actually happen next? Like, what is, in your opinion, the thing that Britain needs to do to get back on track, to get this deal through that everybody has agreed that the Britain voted on and voted for?
Well, firstly, Theresa May's deal is not going ahead. And if I can sort of put some of the other two panellists' comments in context, I think no deal is a huge red herring and always has been, because there is simply no majority for it in Parliament. Now, you can argue that, which is the case, that it is the legal default if there is no deal agreed by the end of March. But the point is, several Tories, including a cabinet minister, Amber Rudd, have said on the record that Parliament will block a no-deal scenario, because a no-deal scenario is equivalent to throwing the entire economy off a cliff edge. And so there are enough Tories even to no confidence their own government rather than enter a no-deal scenario. A no deal is economic sadism, and Theresa May, she may be many things, but she is not a sadist. So what we're looking at is having a deal. Now, whether that deal is a new deal that's renegotiated, which is going to be effectively impossible, as we've already established, or the deal we already have now, which is remaining in the EU after consulting the British people in a new referendum, is up for discussion. But really, this idea of no deal, it has no parliamentary support. It would be politically toxic. There's no parliamentary arithmetic to support it. It simply won't happen.
Catherine, no deal has no support, is what our guests are telling us.
I do think that, Jonathan was right, though, when he said that it is the legal default, so that actually it doesn't matter if they've got no support because they don't get to vote on it. But I do think he's also right that there is the possibility of doing the trade deal that the European Union offered Theresa May in March this year. And I do think that's still on the table, and that makes sense for everyone. And I think it would be rather remiss for the EU as well as the UK if we didn't do that. But at the same time, I think if you go into any negotiation without a fallback plan, you are not in a negotiation, you're in a capitulation. And so she has to prepare for her no-deal option, because that is her fallback plan. It's her legal fallback plan. And despite what you may have heard from your other commentator, Germany's currency is presently about 20% lower than it would be if they hadn't joined the euro. And I've never heard anyone say that Germany's gone off a cliff. We all know that it's doing incredibly well.
It's very important.
It's lower currency, as is China, by the way.
So the
idea that this is going to kill the British economy is just not true. But I do think that a trade deal is possible. But, they do have to do it, and she can't sit there with this very complicated, let's try and get all the benefits of the EU. Leaving the EU means you have to leave a lot of those benefits.
I'm afraid we
can
are
still do
out of
trade
time.
deals because
I'm
it's in
afraid we
their
are out
interest.
of time.
They sell
It's
us
been
more.
a very spirited
Okay,
debate.
sorry.
Thank you very much, Jonathan List, Claude, Moraes and Catherine McBride. And thank you too for watching. You can see the programme again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. And you can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Imran Khan, and the whole team here, bye for now.